From a Karen blocking access at a community pool to a backyard intrusion over food preparation that ends in consequences no one saw coming. This is Patrick, and today I'm covering cases where every one of these started with a Karen who thought they were right until it cost them everything. It was June 14th, 2015, a Sunday, and the temperature in Lakewood, Ohio had reached 91 degrees by early afternoon. The community pool was open, occupied, and operating normally. Nothing about the day suggested a disruption beyond routine summer use. Deborah Foss, 54, had lived in the development for over 20 years and worked part-time at a local retail store. She held no HOA role, but frequently inserted herself into enforcement issues, filing 31 complaints in 18 months, none upheld. Residents described her as confrontational and controlling overshared spaces. She had mild hypertension, chronic plantar fasciitis, wore orthopedic sandals, and lived alone. The Washington family had moved in 8 months earlier. Renan, 38, was an electrician, and Nathania, 36, worked part-time at a pediatric clinic. They had 3 children, including 15-year-old Aliyah. Their dues were current, with full access to amenities. Deborah filed 4 complaints against them, none upheld. Aliyah began recording after repeated confrontations initiated by Deborah. The family arrived at the pool carrying towels and a cooler. Deborah was already seated near the entrance with a printed copy of the association bylaws, positioned to monitor entry. The pool was below its posted capacity. As the family approached, she stood immediately and moved to block the gate, placing herself directly in front of the latch. Without any authority, she told Renan that access needed to be confirmed and that the pool was at capacity. I didn't think much at first, but she got up so fast it felt like she'd been waiting for them, like the paper in her hand was already ready before they even reached the gate. Renan presented a valid membership card. Deborah examined it briefly and stated it appeared expired. She did not step aside. Instead, she remained fixed in place, continuing to assert control over entry. Other residents began watching. Deborah's voice grew louder as she repeated her claims, speaking over responses and preventing the situation from settling. Her posture became rigid. She maintained her position at the gate, using her body as a barrier. Renan remained measured and stated they were entering. When he reached toward the latch, Deborah reacted immediately, stepping forward and shoving him with both hands to the chest. The action was abrupt and not in response to any physical threat. Renan stepped backward onto the grass and maintained balance. He did not respond physically. Deborah remained at the gate, now standing on the narrow concrete drainage edge outside the entrance. The surface was wet from pool runoff and had a thin layer of algae. Her movement during the shove had shifted her weight forward beyond stable footing. Her left foot slipped outward, and her right foot failed to gain traction. Her body tilted backward. She was still holding the printed bylaws in one hand, and did not reposition to break the fall. The back of her head struck the rounded edge of the pool, coping with significant force. Her body continued into the water face down. She did not attempt to recover or surface. Within seconds, the water around her head began to discolor. At first, it just looked like she slipped under normally until the stillness in her body made it clear something was wrong. Renan entered the pool and lifted her, keeping her face above water while calling for help. A lifeguard reached them shortly after and assisted in bringing her to the deck. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was initiated. Aliyah continued recording as bystanders moved back. Emergency responders arrived and continued advanced care. Deborah was transported without regaining consciousness and was later pronounced dead. The cause of death was blunt force traumatic brain injury. The impact created a depressed fracture at the back of the skull, driving bone fragments into critical brain structures and causing immediate loss of consciousness and breathing. She was non-viable before entering the water, with drowning considered secondary. The wet surface and low traction from her footwear also contributed to the outcome. For privacy, the recording was removed from circulation. The Homeowners Association later reached a settlement with the Washington family over the handling of repeated complaints and ongoing disputes. The pool entrance was updated with a non-slip surface, and signage was added indicating all residents were permitted access. The next situation I found shifts into a grocery store where the setting feels ordinary right up until it doesn't. It was November 3rd, 2020, and a grocery store in Naperville, Illinois, was operating through a routine morning rush. Checkout lines, fluorescent lighting, and the steady noise of refrigeration units. Nothing about the scene suggested anything out of the ordinary. Rhonda Peltier, 61, was a retired direct sales representative active in online medical skepticism and personal rights groups. She had no significant medical history. She was physically healthy, wore reading glasses on a lanyard around her neck, and carried a large, structured tote bag she used as a purse. The kind with a rigid flat bottom and exterior zip pockets she frequently rifled through during arguments to produce her phone. At the store entrance, a sign required face coverings. Rhonda entered without one, stating she was exempt after a brief exchange with staff. She then proceeded inside and later joined a checkout line behind Carol Sims, a cancer patient wearing a mask and moving slowly with her groceries. Rhonda commented on Carol's mask, despite no interaction being initiated by Carol. When Carol did not respond, Rhonda reached forward and pulled the mask from Carol's face by the ear loop. Carol took it back and quietly stated she was undergoing chemotherapy and asked to be left alone. Rhonda dismissed the statement and continued speaking loudly about masks, rights, and restrictions. Several customers in nearby lines began recording the interaction. It didn't even feel like anything serious at first, just people slowly starting to watch. A store employee approached and asked Rhonda to step back from the customer. She refused and continued raising her voice. The situation drew attention from staff, and a manager attempted to de-escalate the conflict. Rhonda remained focused on arguing her position, speaking over instructions and gesturing repeatedly. Her behavior became increasingly agitated and physically animated, drawing further attention from surrounding customers. As the confrontation continued, Rhonda reached into her tote bag and pulled out her phone to record what she called harassment by store staff. In doing so, she also dislodged a travel-size hand lotion bottle, cylindrical, uncapped at the bottom, which fell from the bag and landed on the tile floor behind her right foot without her noticing. A moment later, Rhonda took one step backward, a standard shift in posture during the argument, and her right heel landed directly on the lotion bottle. The bottle rolled outward. Her foot went with it. She had no time to correct. Her body weight was already shifting backward, and her arms were occupied, phone in one hand, tote strap in the other. She went down fast, straight back, with nothing to catch herself on. The back of her head struck the tile floor with a single, flat impact. Several witnesses described the sound. She did not attempt to get up. She was unconscious immediately after impact and did not respond to her name. A customer kneeling beside her noted that her right pupil appeared larger than her left within approximately 2 minutes of the fall. Staff called emergency services and began assisting her. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was started while waiting for medical response. Bystanders continued recording the scene as staff attempted basic life support measures. She was treated on scene due to unresponsiveness and transported to a hospital. A CT scan confirmed a large acute epidural hematoma, a blood clot pressing on the brain from the point of impact at the base of the skull. Emergency neurosurgery was performed, but the herniation had already caused irreversible brainstem damage. She did not regain consciousness. Life support was withdrawn 4 days later. The cause of death was acute epidural hematoma secondary to blunt force head trauma. Manner of death accidental. The back of her skull struck the tile floor with sufficient force to fracture the occipital bone and lacerate a blood vessel beneath it, causing rapid bleeding between the skull and brain that compressed critical structures within minutes. Her phone, still recording, was recovered face up on the floor, with footage ending at the moment she stepped back. Now this next story opens up completely onto a highway, where distance between vehicles becomes the main factor shaping everything that follows. It was March 22nd, 2017, and a stretch of interstate highway was experiencing steady morning traffic under a flat gray sky. The road surface was dry and visibility was clear. Conditions were normal, with no environmental factors contributing to risk beyond routine highway flow. Tammy Grulich, 47, worked in medical billing and commuted twice weekly to a medical office in Zanesville. She had no criminal or significant medical history. She consistently wore a seatbelt and had no known mechanical issues with her vehicle. In the year prior, she had expressed frequent frustration with other drivers and often characterized herself as more competent than those around her, particularly in congested or high-speed traffic conditions. Derek Osei, 34, drove a box truck transporting medical supplies along regional routes. He had 6 years of professional driving experience without at-fault incidents. Approximately 3 miles behind him, Greg and Susan Farwell were traveling with their 2 grandchildren in a minivan after a family visit. They maintained standard highway spacing and steady speed consistent with normal traffic flow. As vehicles merged from an on-ramp, Derek entered the right lane at highway speed with proper signaling. Tammy, approaching from behind at a higher speed, rapidly closed the distance and began aggressive interaction, including flashing her headlights. She then moved into the left lane, drew alongside the truck, and blocked its ability to change lanes before cutting sharply in front of it. Derek reduced speed to maintain safe spacing and did not engage. If it were me, I would have backed off right there instead of trying to hold position that close to a truck. But over the next several miles, Tammy continued a pattern of escalating aggressive driving behavior. She repeatedly alternated between speeding up and slowing down, creating unstable flow for surrounding vehicles. At multiple points, she forced following drivers to brake unexpectedly, then accelerated again once gaps widened. Her driving pattern required constant adjustment from traffic behind her and reduced overall roadway predictability. The behavior escalated further when she performed a sudden and extreme deceleration from highway speed to a near stop within seconds. This created an immediate hazard for all vehicles behind her. Derek changed lanes to avoid contact. The minivan following behind her was already required to adjust speed repeatedly due to her prior actions, and now had insufficient distance to fully stop. The minivan struck the rear of her vehicle at high speed. The impact propelled her car forward into the lane ahead, where it continued until it passed beneath the rear structure of the box truck in front of it. The underride guard engaged the upper portion of the cabin. The structural intrusion caused collapse of the roof and upper frame of the vehicle. Tammy, restrained by her seatbelt, sustained severe trauma during both impacts. The initial rear collision caused serious spinal and thoracic injuries due to seatbelt loading forces. The subsequent underride impact caused catastrophic injury to the head and chest region, resulting in immediate loss of vital function. She would not have remained conscious after the second impact. The vehicle came to rest on the shoulder of the highway. The truck driver brought his vehicle to a controlled stop and immediately contacted emergency services. Responders arrived shortly afterward. Occupants of the minivan sustained non-life-threatening injuries and were treated at the scene. The children in the vehicle were unharmed. The cause of death was multiple blunt force traumatic injuries from a two-phase collision sequence. The first impact caused severe but potentially survivable injuries. The second impact, involving underride intrusion into the passenger compartment, caused fatal trauma to the head, chest, and major blood vessels, resulting in rapid circulatory failure. The initiating factor in the sequence was determined to be sudden and extreme deceleration, combined with repeated aggressive driving behavior that destabilized surrounding traffic. The incident was reviewed for contributing factors related to vehicle spacing, braking behavior, and collision dynamics. The findings contributed to ongoing discussions in commercial vehicle safety regarding risk created by abrupt deceleration in high-speed traffic environments. On the highway, you never really know how quickly things can shift once one driver starts pushing limits. Speaking of that, this next case I found follows that same kind of pattern somewhere else. It was August 9, 2016, and a domestic flight was still at the gate at a major airport. The aircraft had not pushed back, and boarding was still being finalized. The cabin was stationary, with passengers settling into their seats and overhead bins still in use. Nothing about the situation had yet transitioned into flight operations. Gail Murchison, 55, worked in real estate in Aurora, Colorado. She had been licensed for over a decade and operated a small independent practice with modest sales performance. She traveled infrequently by air and had booked a middle seat assignment in row 22 for a business-related trip to Orlando. She had consumed alcohol before boarding at the terminal and was traveling alone. Seat 22F, the window seat in that row, was assigned to Noah Castillo, a 9-year-old child traveling alone to visit family. His seat assignment had been confirmed in advance, including the window position requested due to motion sensitivity. He wore an identification lanyard indicating he was traveling alone and was escorted during boarding. Gail boarded and proceeded to row 22, where she found the window seat unoccupied and sat there instead of her assigned middle seat. She stored her belongings and remained seated. When Noah arrived with a gate escort and identified his seat, he stated that he believed the window seat was his. Gale did not acknowledge the clarification and instructed him to sit in the middle seat instead. The escort explained that the assignment was fixed and that the child was traveling alone. Gale refused to move and insisted the seating arrangement did not concern her. The child became visibly distressed and remained standing in the aisle as the situation stalled. A flight attendant was called to the row and reiterated that the seat assignment had to be followed. Gale continued to refuse, stating she had paid for her ticket and would not relocate. Her tone escalated, and she remained seated in the incorrect seat while the conflict continued. This is the point where you can feel the entire row starting to tighten up around what's happening. As the interaction progressed, Gale stood up into the aisle, not to comply, but to continue arguing. She stepped toward the crew member and made contact with their lanyard, pulling it forward during the exchange. The action caused a brief loss of balance before recovery against the seat armrest. The situation escalated further in the confined aisle space, with passengers observing from nearby rows. As the interaction continued, Gale turned away from the crew member and reached upward toward the overhead compartment above her row, pulling at the latch while still speaking. The compartment door released and swung downward in its standard motion, but her position directly beneath it left no space to avoid it. The edge of the door struck the side of her head at close range. The impact disrupted her balance in the narrow aisle, and she fell sideways, striking the armrest before her head hit the floor. The secondary impact was direct and unbroken. She did not regain responsiveness. Crew members initiated an emergency response while medical personnel on board assisted within moments. She was found unconscious with abnormal pupil response and signs consistent with severe head trauma. The aircraft remained at the gate while emergency services were requested. She was transported for advanced medical treatment. In situations like this, everything shifts into procedure mode, even while the cabin is still full of people watching in silence. Medical evaluation identified a severe intracranial bleed caused by blunt force trauma sustained during the fall, primarily from impact with the armrest and floor. The impact resulted in a fractured bone and damage to a major artery beneath the skull, causing rapid internal pressure on the brain. Despite surgical intervention to relieve the pressure and remove the blood clot, the brain injury had already progressed to irreversible damage. She later died from complications related to the injury. The cause of death was determined to be acute epidural hematoma resulting from blunt force head trauma. The manner of death was classified as accidental. The outcome was influenced by the location of impact on a structurally vulnerable area of the skull and the rapid onset of intracranial bleeding. The passenger who opened the overhead compartment was questioned and cleared of wrongdoing. Airline personnel had followed standard boarding and seating procedures, and the seating conflict was identified as the initiating factor in the sequence of events. The child was later rebooked and continued his travel. Inside the aircraft, a small disagreement escalates in a confined space with no room to step away. The next case shifts to a quiet backyard, where a routine food setup becomes the point of contact. It was July 18th, 2014, and the back patio of a house on a residential street in Roswell, Georgia, was being used for routine food preparation for a small catering job. The evening was warm and quiet, and the setting was otherwise ordinary for residential use. Patrice Dunham, 52, had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade and served on an architectural review committee where she frequently submitted objections regarding landscaping, fencing, and outdoor decor. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper and had no elected authority within the community. I don't think it takes official power for people to start acting like they have it. Over the previous year, she had filed multiple complaints against a neighboring family regarding noise, parking, and alleged violations related to home-based business activity, all of which had been dismissed. She had also been formally asked to stop directly confronting residents after repeated disputes. She had a known severe allergy to tree nuts and carried emergency medication for it, which she was aware was critical in exposure situations. The Nguyen family operated a permitted home catering business specializing in Vietnamese cuisine. That evening, they were preparing a dessert that included crushed walnuts as an ingredient. The food preparation area was set up in the backyard, with ingredients organized on a table. Family members were present in different parts of the home, with the catering work ongoing and undisturbed prior to the incident. Patrice entered the property through an unlocked side gate without prior notice or invitation. She began recording and verbally stating that she was documenting what she believed to be a violation of community rules. She approached the food preparation area despite being told to leave. Her behavior escalated from observation to direct interference as she engaged with the ingredients on the table. She picked up a bowl containing crushed walnuts and handled it while continuing to record. When instructed again to stop and leave the property, she remained focused on documenting the scene. She then touched the contents directly with her fingers and brought them close to her face, continuing to speak as she handled the bowl. In the process, she transferred residue from her fingers to her mouth and lips. For individuals with severe sensitivity, even small amounts introduced this way can trigger a rapid and life-threatening reaction. Shortly after the contact, she began showing signs of distress. Her speech became interrupted, and she indicated that something was wrong. Visible swelling developed around her lips and face within moments. She retrieved emergency medication from her bag, but struggled to use it effectively. During the escalation of symptoms, others present attempted to assist. Even when help is right there, execution under panic is a completely different situation. The medication was ultimately administered after a short delay, but the reaction continued to progress. Emergency services were contacted and arrived within minutes. She was conscious but in severe respiratory distress with restricted airflow and rapidly declining oxygen levels. She was treated on site, transported for advanced care, and remained in intensive care but did not regain neurological function. Life support was later withdrawn. The cause of death was anaphylactic shock from exposure to tree nut allergens, involving rapid airway constriction, vascular collapse, and reduced oxygen delivery to vital organs. Medical evaluation noted that the delayed use of emergency medication contributed to the outcome, though symptoms had already reached a critical stage before effective intervention. Authorities reviewed the incident and found no grounds for charges. The catering operation was confirmed to be compliant with local regulations, and prior complaints against the property had been previously dismissed, leading to case closure. In the backyard, direct contact with exposed ingredients becomes the turning point. Next, the parking dispute escalates into a close-range standoff where positioning and refusal to yield space drive the outcome. It was May 12, 2018, and a shopping plaza in suburban Houston, Texas was operating at typical weekend capacity, with steady vehicle turnover, moderate pedestrian traffic, and full occupancy in the main parking rows. Nothing about the environment suggested anything beyond routine consumer activity. Vonda Strike, 49, lived a few miles from the plaza and worked part-time in administrative support for a local clinic. She had no reported medical conditions that affected mobility and was described by acquaintances as generally assertive in everyday interactions, particularly in public service settings. She was alone that afternoon, driving a mid-size SUV. The parking lot had a standard layout with marked stalls, a central driving lane, and concrete wheel stops separating vehicles from pedestrian walkways. Surveillance footage later showed consistent vehicle flow, with drivers circling for available spaces due to peak demand. A vehicle had just begun reversing out of a parking space near the front row when Vonda entered the lane behind it. At the same time, another driver had been waiting on the opposite side of the aisle, preparing to move into the newly vacated spot. Both vehicles signaled intent to occupy the same space within seconds of each other. Normally, one driver yields or pauses once the other vehicle commits to reversing, preventing anyone from entering the blind zone at the same time. Vonda exited her vehicle and immediately approached the rear of the reversing car, raising her voice and signaling that the space was already claimed. The driver, noticing her proximity, applied the brake and brought the vehicle to a complete stop to avoid further movement. The engine remained running, and the vehicle stayed partially angled within the lane. Instead of stepping away from the path of the vehicle, Vonda remained directly behind it, continuing the confrontation. She moved backward incrementally as she spoke, maintaining eye contact with the other driver while gesturing toward the space, and refusing repeated attempts by the driver to disengage and continue reversing away. The rear wheels of the vehicle were positioned near a slight elevation change between the driving lane and the pedestrian curb edge. As the argument continued, Vonda shifted her weight backward without checking her footing. Her heel made contact with the raised concrete divider separating the lane from the sidewalk. She lost balance instantly as her heel caught the raised edge of the concrete wheel stop behind her. With her weight already shifted backward mid-step, there was no stable point to recover her footing. Her upper body tilted sharply in a continuous motion, driven by momentum rather than control, and she began to fall straight back toward the pavement. That split second is where everything stops being reversible, and there's no time left to correct positioning. As she went down, her head remained unprotected, with no reflexive movement to brake or slow the impact. The back of her skull struck the concrete wheel stop at close range, creating a direct, concentrated point of contact. The force of the impact was immediate, and her body followed through onto the ground without interruption. She collapsed fully onto the pavement and did not regain responsiveness, remaining motionless in the position where she fell. Bystanders called emergency services immediately. Nearby individuals moved to assist, but she remained unconscious at the scene. Paramedics arrived within minutes and initiated advanced medical response before transporting her to hospital care. Despite intervention, imaging confirmed a severe traumatic brain injury from blunt force impact to the occipital region, resulting in catastrophic internal damage and rapid loss of neurological function. She did not regain consciousness. The incident review, based on witness statements and surveillance footage, confirmed the fall occurred during active verbal escalation while she remained positioned within a vehicle's reversing path and adjacent curb boundary. A routine parking dispute escalates into a brief standoff in a crowded lot, where positioning becomes the critical factor in what follows, before the next case shifts into a different environment involving controlled mechanical systems under human interference.